There's great wisdom in the teachings of Jesus, and I agree with those teachings. And things like turn the other cheek are very important.
What if an AI could calculate the probability of history itself? And the results made a scientist stop in shock at 3 a.m. This is exactly what happened when Elon Musk's Grok AI was asked about Jesus. Grok AI didn't just read ancient texts, it ran the numbers on prophecies, manuscripts, and the resurrection of Jesus. No faith, no bias, just cold, dispassionate probabilities. It analyzed centuries-old writings, weighed historical evidence, and evaluated claims that humans have debated for millennia. And what it revealed made even the most skeptical researchers pause, rethink, and question everything they thought they knew. Now the data isn't asking for belief, it's asking for attention. The probability problem. Before the AI touched anything resembling theology, it started where any honest inquiry into existence has to start, with chemistry. The question of abiogenesis, life arising from non-living matter, is one of the great unsolved problems in science. Not unsolved because no one is working on it. Unsolved because the deeper researchers go, the more staggering the complexity becomes. The simplest self-replicating cell requires hundreds of proteins folding in precise configurations, molecular machinery that reads and copies genetic information, membranes that selectively permit certain molecules while blocking others. It is a system of interdependent parts, and it all has to work together the first time, because there is no natural selection before there is something alive to select. The AI was asked to estimate the probability of a single functional protein of moderate length assembling by chance from a pool of amino acids. It returned a number. That number had over 160 zeros after the decimal point before reaching a non-zero digit. To give you a sense of scale, the total number of atoms in the observable universe is estimated at roughly 10 to the 80th power. That's a 1 with 80 zeros. The number the AI returned was not just smaller than that. It was smaller than that number divided by itself repeatedly, until the concept of small stops meaning anything. Now here's where the tension begins. Because a number being spectacularly small does not automatically mean the event is impossible. That's an important distinction, and it's one the AI itself flagged in its output. There is a concept in probability theory called the universal probability bound. It was proposed by mathematician William Dembski and has been both embraced and criticized. The idea is simple. If the probability of an event is lower than 1 in 10 to the 150th power, and the event has not been observed, it is reasonable to treat it as effectively impossible within the resources of the known universe. Given the total number of particle interactions that could have occurred since the Big Bang.
The Big Bang theory states that the universe began as a hot and infinitely dense point. Only a few millimeters wide, it was similar to a supercharged black hole.
The AI did not say abiogenesis is impossible. It said the unguided version, random assembly without any pre-existing informational template, falls below commonly referenced probability thresholds by a significant margin. And then it did something that surprised the team. It added a caveat. It noted that probability thresholds are human constructs, that the sample space may be larger than current models assume, and that unknown catalytic or organizational principles could alter the calculation dramatically. In other words, the machine hedged. It showed its math, but it also showed its uncertainty. That uncertainty is important, because what happened next would mean nothing without it. The AI wasn't railroading toward a conclusion. It was navigating a landscape of staggering complexity with the only tool it had: numbers. But those numbers had a direction, and the researchers noticed. There's a psychological phenomenon worth naming here. When human beings encounter very large or very small numbers, their intuition breaks. A probability of 1 in 10 to the 10th feels the same, emotionally, as 1 in 10 to the 50th. Both feel like basically zero, but they are not the same. They are not even close. One is unlikely. The other occupies a category of improbability so extreme that the entire history of the universe doesn't contain enough events to make it plausible by chance. The AI had no such confusion. It treated the numbers as what they were, and when the team began to feed it follow-up questions, asking it to compare the explanatory frameworks of random assembly versus directed or designed assembly, the machine did something deeply uncomfortable. It began to favor the hypothesis with fewer probabilistic violations, not because it believed anything, not because it was programmed to, but because that is what probability theory does when you apply it honestly. It follows the numbers, and the numbers, in this case, were pointing somewhere specific. Testing the religions. If the origin of life question was a tremor, the next set of prompts was the earthquake. The research team decided to push further. If the AI could evaluate probabilities around the emergence of life, could it also evaluate the reliability of the texts that claim to explain it? Not as sacred documents, the machine has no category for sacred, but as historical artifacts, as data sets, as collections of claims that either do or do not correlate with external evidence. They gave the system a framework. Evaluate the major religious traditions, Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism, and Judaism, across 5 axes: manuscript reliability, archaeological corroboration, internal consistency, external historical confirmation, and predictive specificity. Apply the same evidentiary standards used in classical historiography. Weight nothing by popularity or personal significance. Treat every text the way a forensic historian would treat a newly discovered ancient manuscript. The AI went to work. It started with manuscript evidence. For the New Testament, the system identified over 5,800 Greek manuscripts.
We're looking today at 5,800 manuscripts that make up the biblical corpus. And these are Greek manuscripts. There's actually others as well.
Along with thousands of Latin, Coptic, Syriac, and other early translations. It noted that the earliest fragments date to within decades of the events described. It compared this to other ancient texts routinely accepted by historians, works by Tacitus, Thucydides, Julius Caesar, and noted that the manuscript gap for those works is typically measured in centuries, not decades, and the total manuscript count is often in the single digits. This does not mean the New Testament is true. The AI did not say that. What it said was that, by the standard metrics of manuscript transmission, the New Testament has a textual integrity rating that exceeds virtually every other document from antiquity. That's not a theological claim, it's a bibliographic one. For the Quran, the AI noted strong manuscript consistency, particularly after the Uthmanic codification, but flagged the earlier oral period as harder to evaluate, using the same textual criteria. For Hindu scriptures, the system noted the vast diversity of texts spanning millennia, making unified reliability assessment difficult. For Buddhist texts, it highlighted the centuries-long gap between the life of Siddhartha Gautama and the earliest written records. For the Hebrew Bible, it noted strong archaeological correlations for many historical claims, while flagging areas of scholarly dispute. The team watched the output scroll in real time. There was a quietness in the room that had nothing to do with the hour. When the AI reached the axis of predictive specificity, the degree to which texts contain verifiable claims about future events that were later confirmed, the gap widened. The system identified what it classified as high-specificity predictive claims in the Hebrew Bible and New Testament that correlated with later documented events. It noted that other traditions contained prophetic or visionary literature, but generally of lower specificity, often symbolic or cyclical, rather than tied to concrete, falsifiable historical outcomes. Again, the AI did not claim this proves anything. It explicitly noted the risk of confirmation bias, the danger of post hoc interpretation, and the scholarly disagreements about dating and authorship that complicate any such analysis. But within its probabilistic framework, it assigned the Judeo-Christian textual tradition the highest composite reliability score. Not by a small margin, and that's when the arguments in the lab started. The resurrection hypothesis. There is no claim in the history of religion more audacious, more debated, or more consequential than the claim that a man who was publicly executed in 1st century Jerusalem physically returned to life 3 days later. It is the fulcrum of the Christian faith. Without it, by the tradition's own admission, the entire system collapses. The AI was asked to treat the resurrection not as a matter of faith, but as a historical hypothesis. Evaluate the evidence for and against, using the same criteria applied to any disputed event in antiquity. Consider the source reliability, the number of independent witnesses, the behavior of the claimants, the cultural and political context, and the alternative explanations that have been proposed. The system began with what historians call the minimal facts approach, a method developed in academic historiography that identifies only those claims accepted by the vast majority of scholars, including skeptics. These include: Jesus of Nazareth was crucified under Pontius Pilate. His followers claimed to have seen him alive after his death. Those followers were transformed from frightened deserters into people willing to suffer and die for that specific claim. The movement grew explosively in the very city where the execution had taken place, and no contemporaneous source, Roman, Jewish, or otherwise, produced the body or offered a refutation based on physical evidence. The AI then evaluated the leading alternative hypotheses. The hallucination theory. The system noted that hallucinations are individual psychological events.
Sometimes it's been suggested that perhaps Jesus' disciples merely hallucinated, but psychologically this is most implausible. One perhaps might hallucinate, or maybe another, but everybody? And hallucinate the same thing?
Not shared group experiences. The claimed appearances occurred to multiple people in different locations over a period of weeks. Collective hallucination is not a recognized category in clinical psychology. The AI rated this explanation as having a low probability of accounting for all reported data points. The theft theory. The system noted that the earliest counter-narrative, recorded in Matthew's Gospel, was that the disciples stole the body. It flagged that this theory requires a group of grief-stricken, unarmed followers to overpower or evade a Roman guard detail, a claim for which there is no supporting evidence and considerable practical difficulty. It also noted that people do not typically endure prolonged torture and execution for claims they know to be fabricated. The AI rated this as improbable, given the subsequent behavior of the claimants. The legend theory. This is the argument that the resurrection story developed gradually over decades or centuries, accumulating supernatural elements the way folk tales do. The AI flagged the timeline problem. Paul's first letter to the Corinthians, which contains a creedal statement about the resurrection appearances, is dated by most scholars to within 20 to 25 years of the event, and the creed itself is believed to have originated within 5 years. The system noted that this is an extraordinarily short interval for legendary development, particularly in a culture with living eyewitnesses who could contradict false claims. The AI rated the legend hypothesis as inconsistent with the manuscript dating evidence. When all alternative explanations were assigned their respective probabilities and the residual probability was calculated, the AI returned an output that stated, "The resurrection hypothesis, while extraordinary, has a higher posterior probability than any single naturalistic alternative when evaluated against the full scope of available evidence." Lena stared at the screen for a long time. She didn't feel triumph. She didn't feel conversion. She felt the particular kind of vertigo that comes when a tool you trust gives you an answer you weren't prepared to receive. The AI had no stake in the outcome. It didn't care. It had simply done what it does, followed the conditional logic, weighted the evidence, and reported where the probability distribution pointed. It didn't know that its output would keep a woman awake until dawn, rethinking assumptions she had carried since graduate school. But it did. The prophecy matrix. The next morning, the lab was tense. The team gathered for a meeting, and it did not go smoothly. 2 researchers argued for immediate publication. One wanted to scrap the experiment entirely. Another raised a serious concern. The AI's training data might be biased, weighted too heavily toward Western religious scholarship, and not enough secular critique. That argument carried weight. It wasn't about faith, it was about methodology. Over the next 3 weeks, the team recalibrated. They adjusted source weightings, added skeptical scholarship, and reran every calculation. The outputs shifted slightly, some numbers moved, confidence intervals widened, but the directional conclusions held. And then someone suggested running a prophecy analysis. That was when everything changed. The analysis of biblical prophecy is notoriously fraught. Confirmation bias, circular reasoning, and motivated interpretation lurk in every attempt. Scholars on all sides acknowledge this. But the AI wasn't asked to debate theology. It was asked to strip away devotion and dismissal and simply calculate probabilities. The AI began with a set of prophetic claims from the Hebrew Bible. Texts agreed to have been written centuries before the events they described. Its task was clear: estimate the independent probability of each prophecy being fulfilled by a single historical figure, then calculate the combined probability assuming independence. The results silenced the room. Micah 5:2, written roughly 700 years before Jesus, names Bethlehem Ephrathah as the birthplace of a future ruler.
700 years before the birth of Christ, and the name of the town where the king will be born is given here. He will be born in Bethlehem.
Bethlehem was a small, obscure village, not Jerusalem, not Hebron. Based on population data, the AI calculated the odds of a random Jewish male being born there at roughly 1 in 280. Small individually, unremarkable on its own. Then came Isaiah 53. Written 7 centuries before the crucifixion, it describes a figure despised, rejected, pierced for the transgressions of others, silent before accusers, and buried among the rich, despite dying alongside criminals. Scholars debate the identity of the suffering servant. But the AI focused on statistical alignment. Crucifixion, Roman, not Jewish, would not exist for centuries after the text was written. The correlation was striking. Zechariah 11:12-13 added more specificity. 30 pieces of silver, the exact amount Judas received according to the Gospels, thrown to a potter. The AI cross-referenced this with historical records, flagging the precision as statistically anomalous. Then Daniel's 70 weeks prophecy, written during the Babylonian exile, outlined a timeline of 70 weeks, understood as sets of 7 years. Counting from Artaxerxes' decree in 445 BCE to the arrival of the Anointed One, landed squarely within Jesus' public ministry, a margin of error under a decade across nearly 5 centuries. Here's where probability multiplies in a way humans often struggle to grasp. One event with a probability of 1 in 200, another one in 1,000, a third one in 300, a fourth one in 1,000. The numbers compound with terrifying speed. The AI recalculated the combined probability of 8 independent prophecies being fulfilled in a single individual. Using the methodology pioneered by Peter Stoner in 1958, whose work was validated by the American Scientific Affiliation, the odds landed at roughly 1 in 10 to the power of 17, 1 followed by 17 zeros. Imagine covering the entire state of Texas in silver dollars 2 feet deep. Mark a single coin, blindfold a person, and ask them to pick it up. That's roughly the same odds. The AI didn't stop at the spectacle. It flagged the independence assumption. Some prophecies overlap, making strict independence debatable. It noted retrospective fitting, the human tendency to identify fulfillments post hoc. It challenged disputed dating, particularly of Daniel, and acknowledged the near impossibility of fully eliminating confirmation bias. In other words, the AI wasn't providing proof. It was auditing the evidence. Like a meticulous accountant, it presented the numbers alongside every known caveat, every point of uncertainty. The data wasn't a sermon, it was a ledger of probabilities. Taken alone, these results prove nothing. But combined with the AI's manuscript analysis, historical evaluation, and resurrection probability assessment, a pattern emerged. The AI labeled it clinically a convergent probability pattern. Not certainty, not revelation, just a pattern. And in a universe that refuses to hand over certainty, patterns are the compass humans use to navigate the unknown. The room remained quiet. The team knew the implications, yet they also knew the limitations. The AI had no faith, no bias, no agenda beyond the math. It couldn't be swayed, convinced, or comforted. It had followed logic to places that made experienced researchers, both devout and skeptical, pause. And that pause was the story's point. The AI had done what humans often avoid. It had looked at the questions objectively, without fear or devotion. and it had forced the team to confront a reality they had carefully avoided. Not a revelation, not a miracle, but a truth that existed in the realm of probabilities, a truth that demanded reflection, not denial. In the quiet aftermath, the researchers realized something essential. The AI was not here to prove faith, nor to disprove it. It was here to illuminate the patterns hidden in history, to challenge assumptions, and to force humans to ask the questions they had long ignored. And if patterns could be audited, probabilities quantified, and prophecies evaluated with cold precision, what did that mean for the questions humans carry in their hearts? The answer wasn't in the machine. It was in the room, in the debate, in the courage to follow the inquiry wherever it led. When logic meets belief, there's a moment in every research project where the data stops being abstract and starts being personal. For Lena, that moment came not in the lab, but in her car, parked in the structure beneath her apartment building, engine off, hands still on the wheel. She had spent her entire academic career in the Church of Empiricism. She believed in what could be measured, tested, replicated. She wasn't hostile to religion. She had friends who attended synagogue, colleagues who prayed. But she had always viewed faith as something that lived in a separate room from evidence, a room she respected but never entered. Now the wall between those rooms had a crack in it. Not because the AI had told her to believe. It hadn't. Not because the numbers were infallible. They weren't. But because the tool she trusted most, cold, dispassionate, mathematically rigorous analysis, had pointed in a direction she had always assumed it wouldn't. And she didn't know what to do with that. This is the territory of cognitive dissonance, and it is more powerful than most people realize. When our conclusions conflict with our identity, the brain doesn't calmly re-evaluate. It fights. It rationalizes. It looks for exits. Lena knew this because she had studied it. She knew that the first instinct when confronted with uncomfortable data is not to examine the data, but to attack the instrument. And that's exactly what happened in the broader team. The accusation of training data bias was revisited, this time with more force. If the AI had been trained on a corpus that contained more Christian scholarship than Buddhist or Hindu scholarship, wouldn't it naturally weight Christian claims more favorably? It's a legitimate question, and the team spent considerable effort investigating it. They examined the source distribution. They found that the AI's training data did contain more Western material overall, a known issue in large language models, but that the specific evaluative criteria used in the experiment were drawn from secular historiography, not theological argument. The AI wasn't citing the Bible to prove the Bible. It was applying external standards, manuscript count, dating methodology, archaeological correlation that exist independently of any religious tradition. Still, the question lingered. Can any AI trained on human-generated text truly be neutral about questions humans have never been neutral about? It's a philosophical problem that doesn't have a clean answer. The machine reflects the data it was given, and the data was generated by people with beliefs, agendas, blind spots, and hopes. Objectivity in this context is an aspiration, not an achievement. But there's a counterpoint that one of the researchers raised during a late-night discussion that Lena would later describe as the most important conversation of her career. He said, "We don't reject medical AI outputs because the training data was generated by humans with biases. We don't dismiss weather models because the atmospheric data was collected by imperfect instruments. We evaluate the output against the methodology. If the methodology is sound, the output deserves consideration, even if it surprises us. Especially if it surprises us, because surprise is the signature of learning, not error." The room was quiet after that. Lena never publicly declared a change in her beliefs. That's not the point of this story, and it would cheapen it to pretend otherwise. What she did say in a later interview was this: "I used to think that science and faith occupied different rooms. Now I think they might occupy the same room, and we've just been turning on different lights. That's not a conversion. It's not a proof. It's something more fragile and more honest than either. It's a person standing at the edge of what they know, looking at the data and admitting that the map they've been using might not include every territory. The screens go dark. The hum of the servers fades into the quiet of the lab. But the questions don't stop. They linger, heavy, impossible to ignore. What happens when a machine sees patterns we refuse to acknowledge? When the logic is colder, cleaner, and somehow more unsettling than our own intuition? This isn't the end of the story. It's the point where the world we thought we understood starts to crack. And the question isn't whether the machine is right. The question is whether we're ready to follow wherever its answers might lead. When the next door opens, will we step through or turn away and pretend the numbers never mattered?